volunteer jobs that I do, I'm a community representative, and so I make it my business to canvass the community, especially the underserved population. I appreciate that, from which I come, to hear what they have to say. And so to not represent myself and what I believe in the interest of transparency, I personally would not advocate aid in dying. I couldn't do it myself, and if I were a physician, I couldn't do it. But what I hear in the community, and this is what I'd like to have you address, is a relief, even among people who wouldn't even know how to access it, a relief that the option exists. And then, alongside that relief, what I hear is a bolstered effort for them to make up their own mind, and very often they say, no, I'm not going to choose assisted aid in dying, nor would I help the suicide of someone else. But that choice to live the natural length of their life without any assistance is bolstered by the option that they now have, even if they don't even know how to access the option. So could you please address that? And basically, it's an old thing that I've heard, one of my favorite things from Marge Piercy, who says, without choice, no ethic can live. And they're making an ethical decision that I personally, not being in that position, may agree with, which is to struggle to live and experience that, because maybe the Buddhists are right.
Right, and I think a lot of the people in Oregon who have taken advantage of getting the prescription, they've said that it gives them a great sense of relief just to know that they have that in the cabinet if they need it. And I think on a broader scale, I think, probably most of us up here are hoping this turns out to be a springboard for more discussion, for more, attention to the unmet needs of the general public, not the little sliver, but the millions of people who don't have access to basic palliative care services.
It's 75% of California, it's roughly 70%, but are in favor of this legislation. Think that it should be available on some level. And speaking exactly to your point, again, that goes back to the point I made earlier, that this is a symptom of a problem. The problem is poor communication, poor symptom management, poor utilization of alternatives, and this dread of the industrial biomedical system, where people just, with severe disease, get shunted into this one-way track that ends on a ventilator in an ICU for weeks. Those are very real problems, and those 75% of Californians think this ought to be an option responding to a disaster, a crisis. That is the issue here, and this is popping up now because these people have witnessed, have known, have loved people who've been through that nightmare, and it's not gone well, and our healthcare system is to blame for it. We're to blame for it, and all of the physicians, unless we do something to punish those underlying problems. Nobody wants to die. Nobody is looking forward to being dead, but we want to suffer. We don't want it to be miserable, and we've got to fix the misery that's coming out of the system.
I really, rejoice to hear this coming from the community, and like Karl, I mean, wow, if this really catalyzes things, how powerful. And it brings to mind a couple of patients who I've seen who happen to be at UCSD Hillcrest from Mexico in the last couple of weeks, and both of them, to paraphrase, sort of looked me in the eye and said, listen, you can kill people here in California, and I'm not okay with that. And I said, well, great, I'm glad you're thinking about this. Let's talk about what you are okay with. And I'm always looking for Ian to have that conversation, but how much easier did that make it?
One thing we should be clear about, the polls are generally showing that physicians are getting more either neutral or positive about physician-assisted suicide, and also polls polling the general public too. But if you probe a little deeper, it turns out that not only with the general public, but even with physicians, there's a real confusion between a lot of people think that physician-assisted suicide is actually palliative care. They don't really quite get the difference, and it's interesting. And so I think that we are seeing a sea change in public for a lot of the reasons that have been talked about, but there's also some confusion too. Don't underestimate the stupidity of the nation as a whole, or even sometimes physicians, if it's an area that we're not that interested in ourselves, sometimes we will blur distinctions a little bit.
I would just call attention to your use of the word suicide. It covers such a range of things that have been discussed here tonight. Of course, if I were 30 years old and I did something to myself in my life, in my view, that is suicide, because I'd be cutting off the possibility of an enormous range of other parts of life which a person who lasts through the cycles would normally experience. But in my case, I'll be 79 this year, and at some point I will get close to death. And is that really suicide if it is a state of tremendous bodily and mental compromise, which in my view is not living? That's not living. The mere biological beating of my heart or the lungs function is not sufficient to define me as human. So why can't I use, for myself anyway, not to force on any of you others, the concept that when I am no longer human, at least in my definition of that, I don't want the state to tell me that when I'm human, not human, but when I have reached that point, why can't I say, on balance, I don't like the dependency I have on others. I don't like the mountain of diapers which are building up because I am contributing to them. And I don't like the care that, well, I don't like to spend the money on people wiping my butt either. So, I mean, there are all kinds of dimensions to reaching this stage in life where, on balance, I would say, I think I'll let it go.
And you can, right? It's kind of like the same question.
Yeah, I think we all agree that you
And that's not suicide. That's not suicide.
It may not be, depending on how you go about reaching the end of life. I think everybody has a right to say, I'm done with this. I'll exclude those with severe mental illness that we protect from that. But the question isn't whether you have to keep living like that in such a state. It's how you go about getting to the end. I think most people who have problems with this law take exception that you can't enlist the assistance of another person, someone who's traditionally in our culture, in our society, been in a healing role.
And you're not required to. I'm not asking you to simply because I have a right to make that decision. I'm not asking you or to be forced to do that for me.
No, I mean the profession as a group being enlisted to engage in that changes the dynamic between the profession and the public. It's fundamentally different.
But that's certainly part of your autonomy as a doctor.
Oh, of course. And the law's
That's your autonomy as a doctor. But my autonomy is covering another context. And I don't have to worry about being
point that you
perfect.
have the right to determine when your life ceases to have meaning to you, but you don't want other people telling you when your life ceases to have meaning. And I think that that's something that we really have to underscore here, is that it's important not to let this law or any aspect of the economic pressures that healthcare is under start to make us view some life as less worthy than others. You know, the life unworthy of life. We want to try to avoid that. We want to try avoiding being in the position of saying that that your value is gone. Now, you can say whatever for yourself, whatever your criteria are, but to have other people impose it on you would be wrong.
You know, that kind of scary talk has been answered in Netherlands, Oregon. These are just two examples that have had this kind of law in place. Physicians are trusted. People are happy with the law. There's not been any real documented example of the abuse that you're worried about.
That's not true.
Yeah, the ones that you cite, I tried to tell clients, is more complicated than the way you described it. That this is a slippery slope argument has been answered by empirical history.
That's not true.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm afraid your facts are not correct.
I think the challenge here, if I may, is the literature bears out that we are extraordinarily bad at predicting what we ourselves will want in the future. There's some very interesting literature using prospect theory and these other sort of economic things that trying to get people to project in the future what gives 30-year-old me value at 79 years old. And the perspective is so different. It makes one question whether there's an individual self involved in that conversation at all. Is 30-year-old me the same as 79-year-old me? Can I hold myself to those same agreements? And that gets to those same value decisions. That gets to the same point of we don't want other people imposing these beliefs on ourselves. But at the same time, most of these people who are pursuing physician-aided dying are projecting into the future their vision of what hell awaits them. And the literature shows we're real bad at doing that. And I'm right there with you on that individual one-to-one basis. This is where I fall into that real neutral category because I'm not one for restricting what a physician can do or say in the room with her or his patient right there. But at the same time, we have to bear in mind that we're real bad at predicting the future for ourselves.
We're talking about patients who 2 doctors at least have estimated have only 6 months to live. We're not talking about a 30-year-old person who doesn't understand the future. We're talking about sick people. We're talking about suffering people. You go into an ICU, a pediatric neonatal ICU, and you see a little baby convulsing and squirming. Now, that baby can't tell us that he's suffering. But, you know, the chances are that the baby is suffering. So we can make decisions that are imposed with a high degree of probability. We're not talking about giving, death to people who, well, maybe they just haven't understood what life is like. This is a very restrictive law.
No? No, he's got it.
So I want to respect everyone's time, so I've got 2 more people, and then after those 2 questions, we'll try to wrap up here. So maybe Mike, you're closer, and we'll see you soon.
As a pathologist, I always get the last word. I do autopsies, and so my job is to figure out the cause of death. Medical examiners have to figure out the cause of death as well as the manner of death. And the manner of death is homicide, suicide, accidental, or natural. Those are the 4 categories that they are required to decide a death fits into one of those. So there isn't a category for even dying or just suicide.
But it's kind of listed as natural.
Is that right? Is that the law said? Okay, good. So that was at one point. The other thing I wanted to comment about was letting the family know. A family can always order an autopsy after death. So I think that when the 2 physicians are establishing that there's only 6 months to live, they better be sure, because the living family will be able to order an autopsy, and they might find some surprises. So with Morgan's experience, having 10%